up, everyone? Today, as you can see, I've highlighted it already. We're going to look at stem changers in the present indicative. I'll probably just at times just say stem changers in the present tense, but specifically we're looking at the present indicative. And so, as you can see here, I'm actually going to break this down into 3 parts, right? Because this is, it's really challenging, and really what I want to look at today is, most importantly, is the structure, like how this works. And so, as far as the different types of stem changers, you'll just have to work on memorizing them. And over time, as we practice, you'll get them more and more dialed in. So, but again, I want to break this down today. We're going to use a different marker. We're going to use green here. I want to do a bit of an intro, which is going to present all of this information to you all, right? And so we can have that there. And then I'm going to take one example from each, which is going to be the top one of each, as you can see here. And I want to show you how that specific type of stem changer works or conjugates, right? And so we'll look at that. And then the third part of this is to look at just some random sentences and use some of these in sentence form, right? Just to see, kind of fill in the blanks, if you will. And so we'll do that as the third part of this lesson. So hopefully that will be enough to at least help you see some of the structure and how stem changers in the present tense or present indicative work. So let's get into it. Before we get over there, I just want to make note that thus far we've learned regular verbs, which I have here, regular AR, ER, IR, and this is with regard to the present tense, by the way. And so we've learned regular AR, ER, IR verbs, right? Which is you just drop the ending, you drop the AR, ER, IR, and then you add your appropriate ending to the stem. And so again, just because this is right here, here's a stem, here's a stem, here's a stem, and so on and so forth. In other words, the stem is everything except for the AR, ER, and IR. And so we're actually going to focus our attention on stem changers in here, in the stem. That doesn't mean you don't conjugate. Of course, you still conjugate the verb, but we're going to look at making a change in the stem. And so I'm going to bring you over here just as a bit of a reminder for these endings, these verb endings, just in case anybody needed a bit of a refresher, right? For AR verbs, these are the AR verb endings. We have o, as, a, amos, ais, an. And so that would be applied to the stem, right? And so you drop off the AR and you'd add the appropriate conjugation to the stem. And then again, ERs and IRs, it's just worth mentioning, right? Just as a bit of a review. O, es, a, amos, ace, ana, right? And so we have that. And let's just take a look at the IRs just for fun too. So we got o, es, a, emos, is, and n or ana. Now these are kind of fun to try to pronounce on their own, but again, we'll have a look at some of these endings here later and get a better idea of how they're pronounced, like with their stem changer friends. So anyway, so we have regular AR verbs. That's something we've already done. Irregular JO verbs, also known as GO verbs. And so really what they are is when it's the JO form or the first person singular makes a change. Everything else is totally cool. And so actually, and these that I've put asterisks on are going to help us understand that. Now, these 3, tener, venir, and decir, are irregular JO, and they're also stem changers. And so for the rest of these, we're going to do a boot form in terms of how we explain it. But some people call this the sandal. So you can decide if you think it looks like a sandal or not, but that's what we're going to call it for this video. Using maybe even some better examples of what GO verbs are, although these are great examples. I'm going to give you one that, for example, has a irregular JO, but everything else is totally normal. And so when we do irregular JO verbs, those are the ones that we're really talking about. And so I'll use this right here down at the bottom. So salir means to go out. We're gonna make that its own separate word, or to leave, right? Now salir is one of those, and of course I'm gonna put another one, hacer, which is to make or do, right? To make or do, not the best handwriting, but that's all right. And so those will become, they fit within our category of go verbs as well. And so again, like I said, just to give you a couple examples. So this would be salgo, right? So salir would become salgo, right? And then the rest of the conjugation, again, just follows the regular pattern of an IR verb. And so we would drop, we'd have sal, right? Because that's the stem. And then we would add our IR ending. So it'd be sales, sale, salimos, and then salis, right? With that accent there. And then salen, right? And then likewise, we have here hacer, it becomes hago, right? And so, again, that's what we mean by go verbs. And so they're really talking about these letters right here, these last two letters. So they all end with a G-O. So that's why they call them go verbs, right? And so hacer would be haces, right? Hace, and we'd be pulling from here. So haces, hace, hacemos, haceis, and hacen. And so anyways, I know today's lesson isn't on go verbs, but it was worth mentioning because I have it here, and this is something we've already learned in class. And so again, stem changers are the focus for today. And then number 4, we haven't got to yet. So these are irregular verbs in the present tense. And so this is our focus for today, stem changers in the present indicative. And so let's get into these verbs. I want to show you the different, this is just a short list, by the way. This is not an exhaustive list of these stem changes. If you want a much bigger list, check out the link or links in the narrative below. And so I'll have a link down there for everybody. So we're going to start here. Sometimes you hear people say, well, there's 3 types of stem changers, and they will group this into this one, right? And so you have an O to UE stem change, but you also have the U to UE. And really, as you can see, I've written one example here. And so this is sort of the famous example of the U to UE stem change. And so again, with all of these, we can add more examples, but to keep it sort of compact and tight and consumable, we're going to just stick with what we have up here. And so, again, but we'll look at this later. We'll look at how it's conjugated. But it's not an O to UE stem change, but rather a U to UE stem change. And this is jugar, which means to play. I'm sure most of you already knew that, but again, let's write it up there. And again, I want to run through, these are the different types of stem changers. And again, I'll go through these verbs, just so you can see them and hear them pronounced as well. And then, as I said, we'll take the first one of each line here and we'll walk through and conjugate them. And so that'll give you an indication as to how it's done, how this whole stem changer thing works. So for the U to UE, we have jugar, which means to play. And you can see the English translation here. So the other type of stem changer we have is the O to UE stem changer. And again, when we talk about stem changers, we're talking about things happening here in the stem. Notice I didn't box in AR because that's the ending and that's what gets dropped, right? And so then we'd add those endings. Anyways, and so we have encontrar, which is to find. We have contar, which is to tell or count, right? So those are 2 different meanings for that. Morir is to die. Dormir is to sleep. Soñar is to dream. In fact, the noun for dream is, we'll just use the indefinite article, un sueño, right? A dream, right? And notice that stem change happened there. So, and then we have volver, which is to return. And that's a person, right? Or an animal for that matter. And so people or animals like a dog or a cat or whatever, cattle. And so that's what you would use for volver. Like for example, las vacas vuelven a las 5. The cows return at 5, for example. Devolver is a little different. It also means to return, but it means more to return an item. Like if you buy an item and you go to return a shirt or shoes, or in our case here, las chancletas, sandals, right? You would devolver that item. So voy a devolver las chancletas que compré. I'm going to return the sandals that I bought. So that's how that's used. Revolver is to revolve, right? Or to, I think I have here, mix, right? And the reason I have mix in there is because for those of you who like scrambled eggs, we actually call them huevos revueltos in Spanish. So they're like revolved eggs, if you will. And so it's a variation of that verb. It's the past participle, actually. And so revuelto is agreeing with the egg. So that's why it's huevos revueltos, right? And so if you want scrambled eggs, that's how you say it. So there you go. Anyways, moving along over here to, actually, you know what, since we're on the topic of food, let me add almorzar to this. That means to eat lunch. And it's also an O to UE stem change. In fact, the noun is, and I'll draw it up here, el almuerzo, right? So the lunch, if you will. And notice we did that stem change. And so that's kind of telling you what's going on. So hopefully that was helpful as well. Let's check out the E to IE stem change. So we have entender, which is to understand, comenzar, which is to begin, right? It's where you get the noun el comienzo, the beginning, for example. Empezar, which also means to begin. So these two are synonyms. Tener, to have, venir, to come. And again, I put an asterisk here because it's like I said, it fits within what some call this sandal, not the boot. And we'll look at that in a little bit. So mentir means to lie. Preferir means to prefer. That's a cognate. It looks in Spanish, it means in Spanish what it looks like and means in English. So we call that a cognate. Pensar means to think, right? And so again, that's an E to IE stem change. So all the action is happening in here, and here, and here, right here, the stem, of course. And I'm highlighting that for fun, right? Just so you can see which letter changes. And so let's look at the E to I's, right? And this is not as exhaustive as a list of these. Well, none of it is an exhaustive list. So like I said, if you want a much longer list of these verbs, like I said, check out the links below. So again, so back to the E to I. So we have pedir, which means to ask for. It can also mean to order, right? And so if you order food, yo pido la comida, I order the food. So that's, it also works for that. But it can be like you ask for a raise, or you ask for something, whatever it may be. And so that's pedir, right? Repetir is to repeat, right? Another E to I. Seguir, to follow or to continue. Servir is to serve, right? Medir is to measure. And then we have here decir again with the asterisk, because it's much like this one. It's going to fall under our sandal. We're going to call it a sandal for this lesson. So hopefully that's going to work for you guys. But yeah, so here's a list of verbs and their meanings and the category. And I said, you know, now this is probably the third time I've said this. This isn't an exhaustive list. There's a lot more. And so, again, check the links out if you want more examples of these. But I think this is a nice, healthy list. And so what I want to do is I want to show you how to conjugate these. And so that's what we're going to do right now as sort of phase 2 of this lesson. Okay, so now we have a bunch of, well, we just took really the top part of the verb, or the first verb in the list, jugar, encontrar, entender, and then pedir. And I moved pedir over here for space. So let's walk through these, because this is where, and if you notice here, this is the sandal, right? I hope that makes sense, but that's what we're going to call it for today. And then all of these are fall in line with what we refer to as the boot, right? And let me show you what I mean by that. And so we're going to start here with jugar, because it's the first one over here. And we have, notice that the U changes to UE. So it becomes juego, right? And then we honor our yo conjugation for a, our verb. So that's why it's the letter O. And so, again, you'll see that we honor that, those conjugations, right? Because we're conjugating the verb and we're also doing a stem change. And so let's walk through this one. As I said, the U changes to UE, and that's why we have juegas, and then juega, right? Now, take a look here. Notice the shape of this as well, right? That's also why we get away with calling it the boot. Now, I'm gonna put a nice little bow on it, or some shoestrings, actually, not a bow. And so anyways, we have the nosotros and vosotros sit outside the boot, right? And so that's, take note of that. The stem does not change in the nosotros and the vosotros. And so that's where we get this boot idea from. And so the yo, tú, usted, él, ella, and then ustedes, ellos, ellas form are inside the boot, whereas the nosotros and vosotros forms are outside the boot. And by being outside the boot, they do not stem change. And so that's why we have that. And this is a U as well, by the way. I know that might be hard to read. So let's move on over to encontrar. So let's look at an O to UE stem changer, right? And so we have encontrar. It's great. It's a great example, right? And so let's take a look. Again, we're minding our conjugations because encontrar, as you know, is an AR verb, right? And so we're going to have to apply our AR verb endings to it. And so we have encuentro, so that O, right, becomes a UE. So we have encuentro, encuentras, encuentra, right? And then again, we're outside the boot, right? We're going to draw our shoestrings. We have, there's no stem change, right? So notice it's an O, right? An O, right? Encontramos, encontramos, encontráis, right? That O, we don't do a UE there. Then again, we come back inside the boot. And that's a C-U-E right there. And then we get that stem change again. So we get encuentra. Let's move along to entender, right? And so again, now we have an ER verb that we have to consider when we conjugate it. And then this is, as it says up here, an E to IE stem change. So we're going to conjugate and make stem change. So let's take a look at this one. So that, notice that E now is changing to an IE, right? Entiendo, right? We notice these are our endings. We've got to agree with the fact that it's an ER verb. And so that's why we have those endings. So we have entiendo with an O, entiendes, two, entiende, third person singular, entendemos, again, no stem change, and then we have entendemos, right? And then we have for vosotros, entendéis, right? Entendéis, right? We got a little accent there. So entendéis, right? Again, no stem change, right? We have, it's just an E because vosotros and nosotros, again, are outside our boot. We'll draw some shoestrings, and then we come back inside the boot for entienden, right? With a en for our ending, third person plural, and then our stem change. And so let's move on over here to our last example, which is pedir. Again, that's to ask for or to order, right? And so we have pedir. Again, IR verb now. It's an IR verb, so we have to apply our IR endings to it, and then we're also stem changing. Notice that E goes to an I, and so we get yo pido, right? Pido to pides, right? E to I stem change, and then we make our agreement with our subject verb, right? And then we have usted and ella pide. Nosotros, again, it stays in E, it doesn't stem change. So we have pedimos, again, it's an IR verb, so we're gonna apply our IR ending. So pedimos, and then we have pedis, right? Again, no stem change, and then we have our vosotros form, and then piden, right? So again, we go back inside the boot, and we make our change, right? And we might as well stay consistent with our shoestrings. So, good. We got shoestrings on all of them, so we're good with that. Now, what I want to do, because I mentioned this whole sandal idea, let's just have a look at that. And plus, it allows us to look at these three really amazing verbs, right? And so, tener, to have, venir, to come, and decir, to say, or to tell. And so, if you look at this, it's more like a low-cut boot, really. But we're going to call it a sandal just to differentiate. And so notice here we have an irregular jo, or go verb, like we talked about earlier. Again, we have another go verb, again, like we talked about earlier. And then decir is digo. Again, another go verb. But it's not just an irregular jo, or not just a go verb. It's also a stem changer, right? And so with decir is, decir, I put it underneath the E to I category because that's what it is. And then I put this one under the E to IE, or both of these, sorry. So let's just walk through them, right? So for tener, we have tengo, we have tienes, tú tienes, usted tiene, that's a T. Tenemos, tenéis, right? And so again, vosotros and nosotros are outside of this sandal that we're talking about. And then we go back inside our sandal, if that's even possible with a sandal. But for the sake of the example, we'll act like that really exists. So then we have tienen, right? And so venir is very similar. In fact, they're taught sort of side by side because they work in much of the same way. Now, we want to note that venir is an IR verb and tener is an ER verb. So we got to consider that when we conjugate it. And so let's have a look here. Yo, again, is bingo, much like tango, right? And then bingo, right? So you can see a sort of a similar pattern here with the sandal form. And then we have vienes, tú vienes, usted, él, ella, viene, nosotros venimos, so no stem change, right? And an IR verb, so it gets venimos, and then we get venís, right? Vosotros venís, and then ustedes, ellos, ellas, vienen. So we're back inside this sandal we're talking about, and so we stem change, and then we give it its ending, right? And so let's take a look at decir. Again, decir is a little bit different because it's an E to I, of course, but also a go verb. So let's have a look. So we have digo, we have dices. Notice the E changes to an I, and then of course we make agreement at the end on the back end. So we have dices. And usted, el, ella is dice, not dice, right? It's dice. And then again, we get to our nosotros, no stem change in the vosotros. So we have decimos, and then decís, right? And then we have dicen, for example. So we go back inside that sandal and notice the stem changes. And of course, we make agreement here. So hopefully that was helpful. Let's have a look at a few examples, and then we can wrap this up, because this is a long lesson. So we're going to take a look at some examples. Okay, so we've got 4 examples on the board. I thought I'd make it simple and just look at one example of an O to UE, an example of our U to UE, an example of our E to IE, and then here we have E to I. And I mixed up the subject pronouns as well, or the subjects for that matter. And so let's just try to fill in the blanks, just as a bit of a review and a way to sort of close this out. So we have number 1, los estudiantes. We have dormir en clase. And of course, a bit of a joke because, you know, we know that never happens, right? And so los estudiantes, so now we're looking at third person plural, right? And we have dormir, right? And so that's our stem, dorm, right? If you want to pronounce it that way. And this is the O is gonna go to UE, right? And we have, again, like I said, third person plural, so it's gonna be duermen. Los estudiantes duermen en clase, right? And so this is agreeing with this, and then this is our stem changer. So los estudiantes duermen en clase. Okay, here we have 2, right? And so we have 2, jugar al fútbol todos los días. You play soccer every day, right? So jugar is going to be an O to UE stem change, and with it being an AR verb, we've got to make it AS because that agrees with 2. And so it would be 2 juegas al fútbol todos los días. Tú juegas al fútbol todos los días, right? And so that's good. So we've got our stem changer there with our U to UE. And let's move on to number 3. We have yo, right? And then preferir, to prefer. Yo preferir hablar español con mis amigos. I prefer to speak Spanish with my friends. And so let's see what that looks like in Spanish when we conjugate this. And so we have this E is going to become an IE, and then this has to agree with yo. So we get prefiero, right? Prefiero, right? Let's get that R right. So that's an R, and this is an E. So prefiero, yo prefiero hablar español con mis amigos. And number 4 here, we've got nosotros and repetir, right? Again, this is going to become an I. So let's see what that looks like. So if nosotros repetir las letras de la canción, so we repeat the letters or the lyrics of the song. right? And so again, this is nosotros, so it'll be outside the boot. And so we don't need to stem change here. So we just do nosotros repetimos, right? Again, no stem change. Nosotros repetimos las letras de la canción. And so here's some examples. Like I said, we looked at what the stem changers are. We've looked at how they work. And here's 4 examples of how you can use them in a sentence. So I hope all of this was helpful for you guys. I know this was a lot, but hopefully it was helpful today.